Hey guys, so for this video, I am going to be doing a movie review of Tiger Nageswara Rao. I probably butchered that, but it's an Indian, I at least think it's Indian, um, um, action movie. It was kind of, I would also kind of hesitate to call it just solely an action movie. This literally covered the whole, scope of genres. It started out as like this kind of like, police procedural, then it turns into this cheesy action movie, and then it gets into this Bollywood romance comedy kind of, and a gangster movie, and then it went into like this religious like, or not religious, but like an epic, about this guy's, life and all the, great things he did. And it was such a roller coaster of a movie. So I'll get into the story, but just full disclosure, this is probably going to be so disjointed because that's what the movie was. It felt like they were telling one story, but it was like five different points in time. And so it's like five different timelines, and it felt like they jumped from timeline to timeline without any real, you know, any kind of structure. At least that's how it felt to me. And so trying to kind of go from scene to scene what happened, it's almost impossible because they would jump between each scenes, each timeline. Overall, you by the end of the movie, you're able to kind of get a sense of what the movie's about and what happened. It was just very like in a disjointed way. So yeah, let's just get started into the movie. So the movie starts out in the, I guess you could call it present. I think it's the present. There's a group of men. They're being called into this meeting, where this guy, he's being questioned about what happened in the 1970s with this criminal named Tiger. He was a notorious thief who would call the police and taunt them, and challenge them to stop him. And no one knows what he looks like. And this latest challenge, he challenged them to stop him from stealing a train full of grain, that was being sent to flood victims. Um, and Tiger said that he could steal the grain in 5.5 minutes, which the detectives said was impossible because it took them hours to load the train. And so then we kind of get, the police, they're putting all these armed guards onto the train. And then the heist ends up happening. And then a lot of insanity ensues. Oh god, that entire like sequence on a train was so like bonkers. And so much like impossible like physics happened, and it was just hysterical to me. The effects were were horrendous, but I still enjoyed it. Um, but yeah, you should watch the entire like scene when they're stealing the grain from the train. That was so enjoyable. um, and I honestly thought that's what the most of the movie was going to be about, but I was kind of wrong. But yeah, the heist happens, and then at the end, something goes wrong, and Tiger appears to have been caught, but he ends up escaping, of course. And then we kind of get told the backstory of Tiger. He grew up in this town, which was being run by a gangster. His father worked for the gangster, and he would do jobs for him so that they could get money for, food and stuff like that. Well, one night his father, sent on a job, and so they takes his sons, and they end up getting caught. And Tiger beheads his father, because the father wants Tiger to take the money and give it to help others instead of keeping it. Then Tiger, he kind of mm, pushes his way in or works his way into the gang, um, by passing a test where he gets some money from a jar, with a cobra in it, by using his brains instead of brawn. So he fills the jar up with water so that the money would rise and he can just, take it off the top. Um, so this gangster, he is the head of multiple gangs, and they will bid on territories, that these uh, gangs will rob, and it's supposed to keep the gangs from fighting. And so, all the gangs will bid on one particular territory, and then no other gang can steal from that territory, because the other, uh, this other gang, bought the rights to it. And so one day, I guess you call him a tobacco tycoon, comes to ask the gangs if they can help get his cargo after it was either stolen or taken by the government. It was kind of unclear, but he wants help from the gangs to get his tobacco. And this is when Tiger, he decides to make his move by promising to get the cargo in exchange for a chair. I guess chair at the table. Essentially, he wants to become one of the gangs, under this gangster. And so he accomplishes this by distracting the people on the ship by burning the tobacco. And instead of just stealing the tobacco, he steals bars of gold that are on the ship, and he ends up giving it to the tycoon. So essentially, gave him more than he was originally asking for. And the tycoon tells him to call him if he ever needs anything. And yeah, the gangster allows him to be, one of the gangs. And this is where kind of start seeing his slowly gaining power. He starts terrorizing people everywhere he goes. One day he sees a prostitute he likes, and when she rejects him, he hits her, and she falls and hits his head. And then a police officer intervenes, um, and he ends up fighting him and, pretty much putting his eye out. He eventually sees the girls again, and he becomes obsessed with her and starts trying to seduce her. And it turns into a Bollywood dance number. At least I think that was a woman. And I wasn't. It might not have been the prostitute that he had originally hit. I don't know, but there was a prostitute that he hit, and then he becomes obsessed with a girl, and then it becomes a Bollywood dance number, which I did enjoy. It was very catchy song. He goes as far as to steal the dowry, to prevent her from marrying, because this, family had given her a dowry so they'd marry their son. And so he steals the dowry, and then he ends up getting the money back after he, prevented the marriage, to prove to her that he was a good person, because he told her the truth. And yeah, that's how it works apparently. So the brother of the gangster is, squeezing the girl's father for money and tries to take the girl as, payment. But Tiger intervenes and claims that the girl is his property, and he threatens the brother and tells him, that, this is essentially his territory now, not the brother's. Tiger eventually, gets her to accept him, and so she starts dating him. She wants to get married in secret because her father doesn't want her to. But she wants to essentially run away together and get married. But I guess he wants to do it the proper way, and so she says that she will go to the train station, and if he wants to be with her, to meet her there. So he does end up going to the train station, but it ends up being a trap. Uh, the brother, is there, and corrupt police force is there, and they capture him, and the girl ends up committing suicide by jumping in front of the train. I think because he shamed her or something like that. It was kind of a blur. But he then escapes the prison he is in and kills 40 of the gangsters. Tiger then says he's going to break into the Prime Minister's house, and so the police arm themselves to the teeth. Um, but then one of the servants comes down and says that he'd been talking to the lady, the prime minister, even though she's not supposed to be in the house at that moment. She was, going somewhere in the motorcade, and so the police officer in charge, he rushes up to the room. We don't actually see her face, but we hear a feminine voice speaking to the police officer, and so he just leaves the room. So yeah, he was kind of stupid. He didn't think that it could possibly be a trick, but the police officer goes after the convoy he thinks has the thief, and it ends up being the real prime minister, and so he ends up going back to the prime minister's house and finds a note from Tiger. And so he's trying to figure out how Tiger got into the house, and then he realizes that the Tiger was the guy who was helping, escorting him everywhere. So essentially his escort. He was posing as, like, I guess, a military member, and yeah, so kind of we hear that, like, at the beginning they're like, no one knows what he looks like, and I think they say something about hiding in plain sight or something like that. So we see, I guess, how good he is, how good Tiger is. The police officer ends up going undercover in the town that Tiger grew up in, and he talks to the people about Tiger, and that's kind of what we're learning, what's happening there. And we see that the corrupt police force there is paying villagers to say that they commit crimes to make it look like the police force there are actually doing something. One boy does it because he wants to get an education, because the teacher he was going to threw him out, because he was from this town, and he automatically believes he's a thief. So I don't know, like, how exactly confessing to this crime would have done that. Maybe get money to try to pay off the teacher. I don't know. But the I think it's like the police chief. I don't know. But another guy starts beating the kid, and till the kid ends up confessing that he was paid to say this, to confess to this crime, and then the corrupt police officer, the head of this police force, beat him to death because the police officer ends up getting demoted by his head honcho, I guess. So Tiger finds out about that because he originally talked to the kid before, and then he finds out that this kid is now dead because of this corrupt cop, and so he goes to the village where the cop is. I think he's going after the son of the other son of the couple, the brother of the kid who died. Tiger then takes him out, takes the cop out, and then he starts investing in the village. So, because convinces the teacher there to teach the kids how to learn, and so trying to provide them with an education. But he soon learns that the students aren't being allowed into these universities because of where they came from. And so this is kind of where it kind of got like foggy and convoluted. Um, I don't know where he went. I think this is where he ends up in jail. So all that other stuff, between like the before the train station, I think this is what was happening. And then he ends up getting caught and arrested, and he goes to jail. The students that he had been helping are taken by the gangster who wants to know where the gold is that Tiger has hid. Because I believe Tiger has been using the money to actually help fund the schooling for these, students. But yeah, the students get kidnapped by this gangster, and in a really shocking scene, I guess. You kind of think it's like this really goofy action movie, but this was actually a pretty dark scene, I guess. The women are stripped, and the brother is cutting them to try to get the others to tell them where the gold is. Well, one of the women, they're torturing, decides to hang herself. She's like has a collar around her neck, and so she just goes and jumps off this, like, because they're on like a think like a catwalk or something, but she goes and jumps off and snaps her own neck so that they can't use her to torture her friend to tell them where the gold is. I think another woman gets, killed by dogs, but it was a pretty dark scene. um, but they do end up, the students do end up talking and telling them where the gold is. Um, during this entire thing, Tiger ends up getting remarried and having twins, and ends up leaving with them, to protect the twins and his wife against the people that are coming after him. But she ultimately gives his location up because she thinks that the cops will take him in alive, if she tells him where he is, and if she can convince him to give himself up. And so she essentially tells the cops, hey, this specific time he's going to give himself up, with the belief that he will give himself up. He also, sometime during this entire thing, he ends up meeting with a woman who is, I would say she's kind of a pacifist. She wants to help his village, provide resources to his village, if he will change his ways. And so the woman does end up going to the village and confronting the cops. And they threaten to shoot her, but she has balls of steel. I actually really liked her character. She says that there aren't enough bullets for all the villagers, and yeah, and the villagers, stand with her, and so kind of call the cops bluff, and but eventually we get the scene where the cops come to take him in, and the villagers confront him, confront the cops, and they throw gunpowder onto the cops to stop them from shooting the villagers, because if they shoot them, then they're gonna go up too. So, um, there's a scene where the cops, end up finding Tiger in the forest. And he and his friend have to. There's a entire chase scene. Them trying to escape while the cops are trying to mow them down, but Tiger's friend does end up getting killed, and Tiger gets full of holes. But of course, he ends up surviving. The gangster finds out that Tiger has escaped prison and is going to be coming after him, and so he prepares for Tiger by bringing in all his corrupt pals, his corrupt cop pals, to protect him. But Tiger ends up killing all the men who comes after, who tries to stop him, and he kills the brother, and he is able to choke the gangster, before he ends up succumbing to the hundred of gunshot wounds. So, yeah, it was completely ridiculous, scene. But the village, they've can't they come to the factory to try to save him, and finally face off against the gangster, but they of course too late, and they essentially mourn him. And then it's revealed, the big reveal, the big plot twist, this entire time he was actually a really good guy. Every story about him being cruel and evil, was essentially a lie. Him killing his father was a lie. I believe his father killed himself to save his sons. I might be wrong on that. It's kind of fuzzy, but him being the prostitute was also, it wasn't actually him. He was the one who was saving the prostitute from the corrupt cop, that we see for most of the movie. And then when the cop kind of fights back against Tiger, that's when he takes his eye out. So he was actually helping the prostitute. And so this entire story has been about what a good person Tiger is. It turns out he was helping his village by causing enough problems for the police, so stealing and just being pain in the asses, I guess you could say, so that they end up bringing in resources to try to improve the village so that they can catch him. So they would bring in, improve the road so that they can bring in, more vehicles to help try to stop Tiger. And so it was kind of this long-winded way to try to help his village. Indirectly, I guess. He even manipulated the woman, the peacekeeper, the pacifist, to come in and help the village. So he's like mastermind of all this stuff in this movie. And then of course the PM, he was able to get her that message, and so she knows what's going on, and so she sends in officials to arrest the corrupt officials, and Tiger is pretty much hailed as a hero. And so yeah, that was pretty much the movie. And like I said before, that was convoluted, just a convoluted, I guess, retelling of this movie, because it was so bonkers, and it felt like they were trying to tell like this story from 5 different times and jumbling it up. Of course, I've only seen it once, so maybe I missed a lot. Maybe a rewatch will kind of show me that it was done this way purposely, or there's structure behind it. I don't know. But as for the movie itself, I was never bored in this movie. I'll tell you that, which isn't a bad thing. It always kept me guessing, and so I guess I'd rather have that than be bored in tears. The acting was good enough, or let's just say there was no person that was such a bad actor. It was noticeable, and so that's always a good thing in my book. And I was surprised this actually is based on a true story, and they end up showing pictures of the actual people at the end of the movie. And I even kind of looked at some of the people that were this movie's supposed to be based on. The woman, the pacifist. I think I read she's actually an atheist, and she was all about doing good and all that, which I thought was fascinating. But yeah, the story I thought was interesting. It was kind of like this, turned out to be like this, like, really dramatic movie with this, ends up being this, like, really mystery, I guess, about, Tiger and who he was. And yeah, it was really interesting. One thing I did notice, it felt like one of those religious movies where they have this person who did good and they end up like deifying him, and the one thing I kept comparing him to Jesus in the sense that Jesus, I think, was an actual person, but I don't believe he was at all, godly, supernatural, something like that. I do think he is probably a good person who did good things, and then people, as they do, turn him into this god because of that. Martyrdom, I guess you could say. And I felt like this is kind of what they were doing with this guy. They was kind of like turn him into this, martyr who had these like, well, in this instant, tiger powers. And so, but I thought it was interesting. I did enjoy it for what it was, and I guess I would watch it again just to see if I can kind of untangle all these like storylines and stuff that happened in this movie. But other than that, I didn't mind it. I did see it in theaters. I think I was the only one there, but I still enjoyed it. um, but yeah, so that was my reaction to this movie, because I'm not going to try to pronounce that title again. So if you did like this movie review, get a like, subscribe to get notification for all the videos I'll be doing. You guys have a nice night. Stay safe out there. I'll talk to you later.